Abigail Zimmer stared into the murky mirror of her bedroom, trying to see past the smudges and ripples in the glass to the woman reflected back. At 22, she had imagined her life would unfold differently than the nightmare awaiting her at tomorrow's sunset. Her father had made the announcement over supper 3 nights ago, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. She was to marry Victor Holloway, the wealthiest and most feared cattle baron in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory. The year was 1878, and the Wyoming Territory had been attracting settlers, ranchers, and fortune seekers for years. Cheyenne had grown from a tent city to a respectable town with wood frame buildings, a church, and even a hotel boasting glass windows. But beneath the veneer of civilization ran the harsh undercurrents of frontier justice and men's ambitions. Abigail Abby, to her friends, brushed her chestnut hair with trembling hands. The brush had been her mother's, one of the few possessions she had left of the woman who had passed 5 years earlier. Her father, Harold Zimmer, had changed after his wife's death. The kindly shopkeeper had become embittered, drowning his sorrows in whiskey and bad business deals. "Those debts won't pay themselves," he had growled when she'd protested the engagement. "Holloway's willing to clear everything I owe. You should be grateful there are worse fates than being the wife of the richest man in the county." Abby knew those worse fates firsthand. She had seen the bruises on Mrs. Peterson's face when she came to buy flour. She had heard the stories of girls forced to work in the saloons when their families couldn't feed them. But she had also seen the cruel gleam in Victor Holloway's eyes, the way he inspected her like she was a mare at auction. She set the brush down and moved to her window. The moon hung low and full over the distant mountains, casting the main street in silver. Most of Cheyenne was asleep now, with only the saloon still glowing with lamplight. A movement caught her eye. A lone rider was making his way down the street, his horse moving at a leisurely pace. Even from this distance, she recognized the straight-backed figure of Ethan Rutherford, the cowboy who had started working as a ranch hand at the neighboring property last spring. He had a reputation for being fair but fierce when crossed. He kept to himself mostly, but Abby had exchanged words with him a few times when he came into her father's general store. An idea began to form in her mind, desperate and wild. She had nowhere to turn, no relatives to flee to, and no means to escape on her own. But perhaps. The next morning, Abby rose before dawn and dressed quickly in her most practical skirt and blouse. Her wedding dress, a monstrosity of white satin that Holloway had sent over, hung like a specter from her closet door. She ignored it as she quietly made her way downstairs. The general store that doubled as their home was silent. Her father would sleep for another hour at least, his drinking ensured that. She moved through the shadowy aisles, gathering supplies, jerky, hard biscuits, a canteen, matches. She hesitated at the cash box, her conscience warring with necessity, before taking $20, enough to get her somewhere far from Cheyenne, but not enough that her father would be ruined. The bell above the door jingled softly as she slipped outside. The street was empty, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten. She had one chance at this, one desperate gamble. The livery stable sat at the edge of town. She knew Ethan Rutherford would be there soon. He always came in early to check on his horse before heading to work. Abby positioned herself near the entrance, heart pounding in her chest. Sure enough, just as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, Ethan appeared, walking with that easy gait of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His blue eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Zimmer," he said, tipping his hat. "You're about early." Abby swallowed hard. "Mr. Rutherford, I need your help." His expression shifted from surprise to caution. What kind of help would that be? I need to leave Cheyenne. Today. Now. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to steady it. My father has promised me to Victor Holloway in marriage. The ceremony is set for this evening. Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of Holloway. Everyone knew of the cattle baron's reputation, his cruelty to his workers, his ruthlessness in business, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of his first wife. That's a serious matter, Miss Zimmer. Running away from a marriage your father arranged, it's not something to be taken lightly. I know the consequences, she said, lifting her chin, but I also know what awaits me if I stay. Holloway doesn't want a wife, he wants property, someone to bear his children and endure his temper. Her voice dropped. I've seen the way he looks at me. Please, Mr. Rutherford, I have nowhere else to turn. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Where would you go? I have a distant cousin in Denver. I've written to her before, though not recently. I believe she would take me in, at least until I can find work. He glanced down the street, which was still deserted but wouldn't remain so for long. Holloway's not a man who takes kindly to being crossed, Miss Zimmer. If I help you, we'd both be in his sights. I understand if you refuse, Abby said softly, preparing for rejection. But I had to ask, you're known to be a man of principle. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply, then he straightened. Wait here. Out of sight, behind the water trough. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Hope fluttered in Abby's chest as she did as instructed, crouching behind the large wooden trough where horses drank. True to his word, Ethan returned quickly, leading 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a dappled mare. My boss won't miss this one for a day or two, he explained, helping her mount. By then, we'll be far enough away that it won't matter. Abby questioned, adjusting her skirt over the saddle. You don't think I'd send you off alone, do you? The trail to Denver's dangerous, especially for a woman traveling by herself. Besides, Holloway will come looking, and he won't be gentle about it. Ethan secured her small bundle of possessions to the saddle. We need to be gone before the town wakes up. If we ride hard, we can make it to the foothills by nightfall. As the sun began to rise in earnest, casting long shadows across the dirt street, Ethan and Abby rode out of Cheyenne, keeping to the back trails and avoiding the main road. Abby felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had never defied her father so openly before, never taken such a risk. Thank you, she said as they put distance between themselves and the town. I know what this might cost you. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Everyone deserves a choice, Miss Zimmer. Even in the territories. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a steady counterpoint to Abby's racing thoughts. She had done it, she had escaped. But what lay ahead was as uncertain as the vast Wyoming sky stretching above them. By mid-morning, they had covered significant ground, following a lesser-known trail that wound through scrubby hills and sparse woodland. Ethan kept them moving at a steady pace, occasionally looking back to ensure they weren't being followed. How did you come to work for the Millers? Abby asked during a brief rest to water the horses at a small creek. Ethan splashed water on his face before answering. I drifted in from Texas about a year ago. Worked cattle drives for years before that. Decided I wanted something more stable. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Ironic, considering I'm now helping you run away. I'm sorry to have disrupted your stability, Abby said, genuinely regretful. Don't be. Some things are worth disrupting for. His gaze was steady. No one should be forced into Holloway's hands, the stories I've heard. He shook his head. Let's just say you made the right decision. You know him well. Well enough. Worked briefly on his ranch when I first came to Wyoming. Left after seeing how he treated his men and his livestock. A man who's cruel to animals is usually cruel to people too. Abby nodded, a chill running through her despite the warming day. My father claims he's changed, that he's seeking redemption through marriage. She laughed bitterly. More likely, he's seeking someone young enough to bear him sons and too dependent to leave. Your father sold you to clear his debts, Ethan stated bluntly. There's no pretty way to frame that. The truth of his words stung, but Abby couldn't deny them. He wasn't always like this after my mother died. She trailed off, unwilling to make excuses. Grief changes people, Ethan acknowledged, but it doesn't justify what he did. They remounted and continued their journey, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills of the Rockies. They would need to find a place to camp soon. Even in early summer, the nights could be cold at higher elevations. As the afternoon waned, Ethan led them to a sheltered hollow near a small stream. "We'll rest here for the night," he said, dismounting and helping Abby down. His hands were strong and calloused but gentle on her waist. "I'll get a fire going." While Ethan gathered firewood, Abby unpacked their meager provisions. She arranged the jerky and biscuits on a flat stone and filled their canteens from the stream. It wasn't much of a meal, but it would sustain them. "I wish I'd thought to bring coffee," she said as Ethan returned with an armful of wood. "I've got some," he replied, reaching into his saddlebag. "Never ride without it. It's trail coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, but it's hot." Soon, a small fire crackled, and the aroma of coffee mingled with the scent of pine and earth. They sat side by side, the tension of the day gradually easing from their bodies. "How far to Denver?" Abby asked, sipping the bitter brew. 4 days, maybe 5, depending on the weather and if we're pursued." Ethan stared into the flames. "Once we cross into Colorado territory, we'll be safer. Holloway's influence doesn't extend as far there. And after you get me to Denver, what then?" Ethan considered for a moment. "I'll make sure you're settled with your cousin, that she's willing to take you in. Then I suppose I'll head back and face whatever comes. You could be fired, or worse, if Holloway finds out you helped me." "I've faced worse odds," he said with a shrug. "Besides, I've been thinking of moving on anyway. Wyoming's getting crowded." Abby studied his profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his eyes reflected the flames. He was handsome, she realized, in a rugged, unpolished way. More importantly, he was kind and principled, risking his livelihood to help a woman he barely knew. "Why did you agree to help me?" she asked softly. "Really?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Abby thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I had a sister once, younger than me by 4 years. Our parents died of fever when I was 16, she was 12. We had no other family, so I did what I could to raise her. Took odd jobs, worked ranches, moved where the work was." His voice grew rougher. "When she was about your age, a man like Holloway took an interest in her. Wealthy, powerful, used to getting his way. I was working a cattle drive, gone for months, by the time I returned. He broke off." "What happened?" Abby asked gently. "She'd married him. Said she did it to make a better life for both of us." Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee cup. 2 years later, she was dead. Accident, they called it. Fell down the stairs." His eyes, when they met Abby's, were hard with old pain. "I knew better, but no one would listen to a drifting cowboy over a respected businessman." "I'm so sorry," Abby whispered. "It was a long time ago. But when I saw you this morning, heard what you were facing, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself." They fell silent after that, each lost in private thoughts as the fire burned low. Ethan eventually stretched out his bedroll on one side of the fire, offering Abby his coat as an extra layer against the night chill. She accepted it gratefully, wrapping herself in its warmth, and the faint scent of leather and tobacco that clung to the fabric. As she drifted toward sleep, Abby found herself studying Ethan's face, relaxed now in slumber. For the first time since her father's announcement, she felt something other than fear, a spark of hope, of possibility. Whatever awaited her in Denver, at least she had this chance, this freedom. And for now, that was enough. The sound of a branch snapping jolted Abby awake. The fire had died to embers, casting only the faintest glow over their campsite. The moon had risen high, bathing the clearing in silver light. She sat up, heart pounding. Ethan was already on his feet, rifle in hand. He motioned for her to stay still, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. "Probably just a deer," he whispered, but his tense posture suggested he wasn't convinced. Another snap, closer this time. Ethan raised his rifle, aiming into the shadows between the trees. "Show yourself," he called, voice steady. A chuckle emerged from the darkness, followed by a figure stepping into the moonlight. It was a man Abby didn't recognize, tall and lanky with a week's growth of beard. Behind him appeared two more men, both armed. "Well, well," the first man drawled. "What have we here?" A cowboy and his lady friend out for a moonlight ride. Ethan didn't lower his rifle. "We're just passing through, don't want any trouble." "Funny thing about trouble," the man replied, moving closer. "It has a way of finding folks who don't want it." His gaze shifted to Abby, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Especially when there's a reward involved. Abby's blood ran cold. "Reward?" The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Victor Holloway's offering $100 for information leading to the return of his bride-to-be. Seems she got cold feet and ran off. Description matches you perfect, miss." "How did you find us so quickly?" Ethan demanded, his finger tensing on the trigger. "Weren't hard. Town like Cheyenne, everyone knows everyone's business. Saw you two riding out at dawn. Figured you'd take this route, it's the quickest way if you're heading south or east." The man shrugged. "We were just planning to follow your trail come morning, but seems luck's on our side finding you tonight." Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Abby and the three men. "Miss Zimmer isn't going back to Cheyenne. Not to Holloway." "That ain't for you to decide, cowboy," the second man said, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "We're taking her back, and you're either coming peacefully or in pieces. Your choice." Abby rose to her feet, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I left of my own free will. There's no law saying I have to marry anyone." "Maybe not," the first man conceded, "but there are laws about stealing horses. That mare you're riding, she belongs to the Miller Ranch, doesn't she? And I'm betting they didn't give you permission to take her." His smile widened. "That's horse theft, miss, hanging a fence in these parts." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I work for the Millers, I'll answer for the horse." "And what about the money missing from Harold Zimmer's cash box?" the man continued. "He's claiming theft. $20, he says." Abby felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had reported her as a thief. Whatever small hope she had harbored of reconciliation someday vanished in that instant. "This doesn't have to end badly," the third man spoke up, his tone more reasonable than his companion's. "Just come back with us. Holloway's willing to forgive the whole incident, call it pre-wedding nerves. No charges filed." "And if I refuse," Abby challenged, "then your cowboy friend here gets charged as your accomplice. Horse theft, kidnapping maybe. Depends how creative the judge is feeling." Ethan's voice was low and dangerous when he spoke. "You boys are making a mistake. Turn around and ride away while you still can." The leader's hand moved to his gun. "I don't think so." What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Ethan fired first, the rifle's report deafening in the quiet night. The leader stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. The second man drew his pistol, but Ethan was already moving, tackling him to the ground. The third man fired wildly, the bullet splintering a tree trunk inches from Abby's head. She didn't think, just reacted, grabbing a burning stick from the fire's embers and swinging it at the third man's face. He yelped in pain, momentarily blinded. "Run!" Ethan shouted, struggling with the second man. "Get to the horses!" Abby hesitated, unwilling to leave him. "Go," he ordered again, landing a solid punch that left his opponent dazed. She ran toward the horses, which were stamping nervously at the edge of the clearing. Behind her, she heard more scuffling, another gunshot. Terror gripped her heart, but she forced herself to focus on untying the horses. Just as she freed them, Ethan appeared at her side, breathing hard, a cut bleeding above his eye. "Mount up," he gasped, helping her onto the mare before swinging himself onto his gelding. "Ride hard and don't look back." They galloped away from the clearing, leaving the three men cursing and shouting behind them. Ethan led them off the trail and into denser woods, where the moonlight barely penetrated the canopy above. They rode for what felt like hours, the horses stumbling occasionally on the rough terrain. Finally, when the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Ethan slowed their pace. They had reached a high ridge overlooking a vast valley. "We should be safe for now," he said, dismounting stiffly. "They won't be able to follow our trail easily through the rocks." Abby slid from her saddle, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the blood that had dried on Ethan's face. He touched the cut gingerly. "It's nothing. Grazed by a bullet, that's all. Let me see." She moved closer, examining the wound with gentle fingers. "It needs cleaning, at least." Ethan allowed her to guide him to a flat rock. She used water from their canteen and a scrap of cloth torn from her petticoat to clean the dried blood away. The cut wasn't deep, but it had bled freely, as head wounds tend to do. "Thank you," she said softly as she worked, "for fighting for me back there." "They weren't giving us much choice," he replied, wincing slightly as she dabbed at the wound. "But we've got a bigger problem now. They'll spread word. Every bounty hunter and lawman between here and Denver will be looking for us." "What do we do?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Change our plans. We can't go to Denver now, it's too obvious. We need to head somewhere unexpected, somewhere Holloway's influence doesn't reach." "Where?" "West," he decided after a moment's thought. "To the Idaho Territory maybe, or even all the way to Oregon. It's a longer journey, much harder terrain, but fewer people to recognize us." Abby finished cleaning his wound and sat back on her heels. "Idaho, that's hundreds of miles." "Yes, and I won't lie to you, it won't be an easy journey, but it might be our only chance." He looked at her seriously. "I understand if that's not what you want. If you'd rather take your chances in Denver with your cousin, I'll get you there as safely as I can." Abby considered her options. Denver had been her original plan, a place where she had at least one connection. But Ethan was right, it would be the first place Holloway would look. And now that she had been branded a thief, the law would be hunting her too. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. "If you think Idaho is our best chance, then that's where we'll head." Ethan nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. "We'll need supplies. There's a small trading post about half a day's ride from here. It's run by a Shoshone man and his white wife. They keep to themselves, don't ask many questions." "Will they report us?" "I don't think so. Joseph, that's the owner, has no love for men like Holloway. And I once helped his son when he got into trouble with some drunk cowboys in Cheyenne." Ethan stood, stretching his sore muscles. "We should move on. Get as much distance as possible before our friends back there recover enough to come looking." They rode north through the morning, keeping to high ground where they could watch for pursuers. The landscape was beautiful in the early summer light, rolling hills giving way to more dramatic peaks, wildflowers dotting the meadows, streams running clear and cold with mountain snowmelt. Under different circumstances, Abby might have enjoyed the journey. Despite her exhaustion and fear, she couldn't help but appreciate the wild beauty around them. She had rarely ventured more than a few miles from Cheyenne in her life. The vastness of the territory was both intimidating and exhilarating. "Have you been to Idaho before?" she asked as they paused to let the horses drink from a stream. Ethan nodded. "Spent a winter there about 5 years back. Beautiful country, mountains, forests, rivers full of fish. Winters are harsh, but the summers are mild. Good land for farming or ranching if that's what you're looking for." "And is that what you're looking for?" She was curious about this man who had risked so much for her. A shadow crossed his face. "Used to think so. Thought I'd find a piece of land someday, build something lasting." He shrugged. "Dreams change." "What happened? Life, loss." He met her gaze. "After my sister died, I didn't see much point in putting down roots. Easier to keep moving. And now?" "What will you do once we reach Idaho?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Haven't thought that far ahead. First priority is getting you safely away from Holloway. And then you'll leave." The thought brought an unexpected pang. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. Abby looked away, confused by her own feelings. "I don't know what I want anymore. Everything's happened so fast." Ethan didn't press her further. They remounted and continued their journey in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. By mid-afternoon, they reached the trading post Ethan had mentioned. It was a sturdy log building nestled in a small valley, with smoke rising from the chimney. A few horses were tethered outside, and a weathered sign proclaimed, "Joseph's Trading Post, fair prices, no questions." "Let me do the talking," Ethan said as they approached, "and it might be best if we're not too specific about where we're headed." The interior of the trading post was dim and crowded with goods of all descriptions, from practical necessities like flour and ammunition to luxuries like canned peaches and bolts of fabric. Behind the counter stood a tall Native American man with graying hair tied back in a braid. His face remained impassive as they entered, but Abby thought she detected a flicker of recognition when he saw Ethan. "Joseph," Ethan greeted, extending his hand. The man shook it firmly. "Rutherford, been some time." "It has. How's your boy doing?" A hint of a smile touched Joseph's lips. "Good, married now, baby on the way." "Glad to hear it." Ethan gestured to Abby. "This is Miss Zimmer. We're traveling and in need of supplies." Joseph's dark eyes took in Abby's appearance, her rumpled dress, the exhaustion evident in her posture, but he asked no questions. "What do you need?" Ethan listed off their requirements: food staples, coffee, ammunition, a bedroll for Abby, warmer clothing, and basic medical supplies. Joseph moved efficiently around the store, gathering the items. A woman emerged from the back room while they were selecting supplies. Joseph's wife, Abby presumed. She was a petite woman with blonde hair streaked with gray, her face weathered but kind. "Sarah," Joseph introduced her. "My wife." Sarah smiled at Abby. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a moment to freshen up, dear." Abby glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "That would be wonderful, thank you." While Ethan concluded their business with Joseph, Sarah led Abby to the family's living quarters behind the store. It was a cozy space with handmade furniture and colorful woven blankets decorating the walls. "The wash basin is there," Sarah indicated, pouring fresh water from a pitcher. "Take your time. I'll have some stew ready when you're done." Left alone, Abby gratefully washed her face and hands, combed her tangled hair, and pinned it back neatly. Sarah had left a clean blouse for her, simple but well made. Abby changed into it, appreciating the fresh garment after a day and night on the trail. When she emerged, Sarah was ladling thick stew into bowls at the table. Ethan was already seated, looking more relaxed than she had seen him since their journey began. "Joseph says there have been no riders through asking questions," he told her as she sat beside him. "But he's heard rumors from Cheyenne about a runaway bride and a reward." Abby's appetite diminished at the reminder of their situation. "How much of a reward?" "Up to $500 now," Joseph said, joining them at the table. "Holloway is not a man used to being denied what he wants." $500, Abby whispered. That was more money than most men in the territory saw in a year. "Everyone will be looking for us." "Not everyone," Sarah said firmly. "Some of us remember what it was like to need help." She exchanged a glance with her husband. "Joseph and I met when I was fleeing an arranged marriage to a cruel man back east. My family had disowned me for refusing him." Joseph nodded. "The Shoshone took Sarah in when others would not, gave her shelter, respect." His expression hardened. "We know what men like Holloway are capable of." "We won't breathe a word about your passing through," Sarah assured them. "And we've packed enough supplies to get you well into Idaho territory. Joseph marked a route on a map for you, one that avoids the main trails and settlements." Ethan's shoulders relaxed visibly. "We're grateful." They ate the hearty stew and freshly baked bread, the first real meal they'd had since fleeing Cheyenne. As they ate, Joseph shared information about the terrain ahead and potential dangers not just from pursuers but from the land itself. "Rivers are running high with snowmelt," he warned. "And there are still patches of snow in the high passes. The route I've marked will keep you lower, though it's longer." After the meal, while Ethan and Joseph discussed the trail in detail, Sarah took Abby aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing her a small package wrapped in cloth. "Open it when you're alone." Curiosity piqued. Abby thanked her and tucked the package into the pocket of her skirt. They left the trading post as the afternoon waned, their horses laden with supplies, their spirits buoyed by the unexpected kindness they had received. Joseph refused payment for most of the supplies, accepting only what Ethan insisted on giving him. "Safe travels," the trader said as they mounted up. "May the spirits guide your path." They rode west for several more hours before making camp in a sheltered ravine. The new supplies made for a more comfortable camp than the previous night, a proper tent for Abby, thicker blankets, and a meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits that Ethan prepared over the fire. As they sat by the fire after eating, Abby remembered Sarah's package. She unwrapped it to find a small knife in a leather sheath, its handle carved with intricate designs, and a folded piece of paper. The note read, "A woman alone must be able to protect herself. My mother gave this to me when I left home. Now I pass it to you. May it serve you well, though I hope you never need it." "Sarah," Abby ran her finger along the blade, testing its sharpness. It was well crafted and deadly in its simplicity. "A gift?" Ethan asked, noticing the knife. Abby nodded, showing it to him. "From Sarah." He examined it with appreciation. "Good steel, Shoshone craftsmanship." He handed it back to her. "You should keep it close, know how to use it if necessary. I've never—" Abby hesitated. "I've never hurt anyone before. Let's hope you never have to." Ethan poked at the fire. "But if the situation arises, don't hesitate. Aim for the eyes, throat, or stomach and use all your strength." The practical advice should have frightened her, but instead, Abby felt oddly empowered. For too long, she had been at the mercy of others: her father, Holloway, the expectations of society. Now she was taking her fate into her own hands, however uncertain that fate might be. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything you've done. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. You didn't have to help me to risk your life and reputation." Ethan looked up from the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering light. Maybe I did have to. Maybe we all reach points in our lives where we have to decide what kind of person we want to be. He added a small log to the flames. When you came to me yesterday morning, was it only yesterday? You gave me that chance to be what kind of person, the kind who does what's right, not what's easy. His eyes met hers across the fire. I've spent years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to get involved to care. It's a lonely way to live, Abby. It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. What will you do once we reach Idaho? She asked again, the question that had been lingering between them. Will you go back to drifting? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in years, I'm thinking beyond the next day, the next week, and that's unsettling. Because of me? Abby asked softly. Because of what helping you has reminded me of that there are still things in this world worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. He looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. You deserve a chance at freedom, Abby, a chance to decide your own path. And what about you? What do you deserve? A sad smile touched his lips. Not sure I've earned the right to think about that yet. Abby wanted to argue with him, to tell him that his kindness and courage deserved reward, but she sensed he wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, she changed the subject. Tell me about Idaho. What's it really like? Ethan's expression lightened, and he began to describe the territory, the vast forests, the rugged mountains, the fertile valleys where wildflowers bloomed in profusion during the brief summer months. He spoke of small settlements where people minded their own business, of jobs to be had in logging camps and mines, of land available for those willing to work it. As he talked, Abby found herself imagining a life there, a small cabin perhaps, a garden, work that was hard but satisfying. And unbidden, she imagined Ethan in that life, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been these past 2 days. The thought both excited and frightened her. She had fled one future only to find herself contemplating another, one just as uncertain but infinitely more appealing. But did Ethan see her as anything more than a responsibility, a woman in need of rescue? They retired to their separate sleeping places, Ethan beneath the stars, Abby in the small tent, each carrying private thoughts and unspoken possibilities. The days that followed settled into a rhythm as they traveled steadily westward. They avoided main trails and settlements, camping in hidden glens and sheltered valleys. Ethan proved to be a skilled guide, reading the land and weather with an ease born of years on the trail. He taught Abby how to build a fire properly, how to identify edible plants to supplement their supplies, how to tell direction by the sun and stars. Their conversations grew longer and more personal as the miles accumulated beneath their horses' hooves. Abby shared stories of her childhood in Cheyenne, of her mother who had loved books and music, of her dreams of someday traveling to places she had only read about. Ethan spoke of his years on cattle drives, of the characters he had met, of quiet nights beneath vast skies that made a man feel both insignificant and part of something greater. They didn't speak of Holloway or the danger pursuing them, though they remained vigilant, taking turns keeping watch at night and scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might signal riders. On the 5th day of their journey, they crossed into Idaho territory, marked only by a natural boundary of mountains rather than any man-made sign. They celebrated that night with a meal of freshly caught trout that Ethan taught Abby to clean and cook over the fire. "First meal in your new home," he said, raising his tin cup of coffee in a toast. Abby smiled, raising her own cup. "To new beginnings." They were deep in the mountains now, following winding valleys and crossing rushing streams swollen with snowmelt. The journey was challenging but beautiful, the landscape more dramatic than anything Abby had known in Wyoming. On the seventh day, disaster struck. They were fording a river that Joseph had marked as passable on his map, but spring rains had raised the water level higher than anticipated. Midway across, Abby's mare lost its footing on the slick riverbed stones. The current, swift and cold, caught them, sweeping horse and rider downstream. Abby heard Ethan's shout as she was torn from the saddle. The frigid water closed over her head, disorienting her. She fought her way to the surface, gasping for air, only to be pulled under again. Her heavy skirts dragged at her like lead weights. Something solid struck her side, a fallen tree extending into the water. She grabbed at it desperately, her numbed fingers somehow finding purchase. Using all her strength, she pulled herself toward the shore, the current fighting her every inch of the way. Hands seized her arms, hauling her from the water. Ethan's face, white with fear, was the first thing she saw as she collapsed on the rocky bank, coughing and shivering. "Abby, are you hurt?" His hands moved over her, checking for injuries. "Sea cold," she managed through chattering teeth. "The horse. Downstream, I'll look for her later." Ethan was already stripping off his coat, wrapping it around her. "We need to get you warm. Can you stand?" With his help, she staggered to her feet. Ethan led her to a small clearing just back from the riverbank and quickly built a fire, his movements efficient despite his obvious concern. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "Wrap yourself in the blankets from my pack. I'll find something dry for you to wear." Abby's fingers were too numb to manage the buttons of her blouse. "I can't," she admitted, embarrassment warring with the urgent need for warmth. Ethan hesitated, then turned to face her. "May I help?" At her nod, he gently unbuttoned her sodden blouse and helped her out of it, his eyes respectfully averted as much as possible. He did the same with her skirt and petticoats, leaving her in her chemise and drawers, which were also wet but less heavy. "These too," he said apologetically. "You'll catch your death otherwise." Abby nodded, beyond embarrassment now as violent shivers racked her body. Ethan helped her remove the last of her wet garments and quickly wrapped her in the dry blanket from his pack. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, guiding her to a fallen log he had dragged close to the flames. "I'll make coffee. Get something hot inside you." As warmth gradually returned to her limbs, Abby watched Ethan move efficiently around their hastily established camp. He had removed his own wet shirt and boots, but seemed unbothered by the cold. The firelight played across his bare chest and shoulders, highlighting the lean muscles earned through years of physical labor. He brought her coffee in a tin cup, holding it to her lips when her hands proved too unsteady. The hot liquid spread warmth through her core. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. I thought I was going to drown." "So did I," Ethan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. He knelt before her, his eyes searching her face. "When I saw you go under, I've never been so scared in my life." The naked feeling in his voice touched something deep inside Abby. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm still here," she whispered. Ethan caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. For a long moment they stayed like that, connected by touch and gaze, the unspoken growing stronger between them. Then Ethan stood abruptly. "You should rest. I'll see what I can salvage from the river. Look for your horse." Abby watched him go, confusion and disappointment mingling with the lingering fear of her near drowning. Had she imagined the moment of connection between them? Or had Ethan pulled away deliberately? She was asleep when he returned hours later, exhaustion claiming her despite her troubled thoughts. She woke to find a small pile of their possessions drying by the fire, her saddlebags, some of their supplies, her boots. Of the mare, there was no sign. "I found her 2 miles downstream," Ethan said when she asked. His expression was grim. "She didn't make it, must have hit her head on the rocks." Abby closed her eyes, sorrow washing over her. The mare had been a good, steady mount, carrying her without complaint through difficult terrain. "I'm sorry," she said. "It wasn't your fault." Ethan sat beside her, offering a plate of beans and biscuits. "Eat, you need your strength." They ate in silence. Abby was aware of a new tension between them, a carefulness in the way Ethan avoided meeting her eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" she finally asked. "Before, when—" "No," he said quickly. "You did nothing wrong. It was me. I shouldn't have." He sighed heavily. "You're vulnerable, Abby. You've been through a trauma. You're dependent on me right now. It wouldn't be right for me to take advantage of that." "Is that what you think you'd be doing?" she asked, stung by his assumption. "Taking advantage, maybe not intentionally. But you're alone out here with me, hundreds of miles from anyone you know. You've escaped one man who wanted to control you. The last thing you need is to feel obligated to another." "That's not what this is," Abby said firmly. "I'm grateful to you, yes, but what I feel—" She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. What did she feel for this quiet, honorable man? "It's not obligation, it's something else entirely." Ethan looked at her then, his blue eyes troubled. "You deserve a fresh start, Abby. A chance to find out who you are, what you want, without anyone else's expectations, even mine." "And what about what I want right now?" she challenged, a boldness rising in her that surprised them both. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "I want you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass." Abby moved closer to him. "I nearly drowned today. It made me realize that life is short and uncertain. I don't want to waste it being afraid of what I might feel." Ethan remained still as she reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "I'm not afraid of you, Ethan. I'm afraid of never having the chance to discover what this could be between us." For a breathless moment, he didn't respond. Then slowly, he raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I don't want to be someone you regret, Abby." "You couldn't be," she said simply. He released her hand to cup her face gently. "We should take it slow. We have time." Abby nodded, understanding his caution but also recognizing the promise in his words. They had time, a precious gift, when just days ago, her future had seemed irrevocably set on a single, dreaded path. "So what happens now?" she asked. "With only one horse, I mean." Ethan's practical nature reasserted itself. "We'll have to double up on my gelding. He's strong, but it'll slow us down. We might need to lighten our load, leave some things behind." "How much further to where we're going?" Abby realized she didn't even know their exact destination. "There's a settlement called Pine Valley about 3 days' ride from here, or it would be with 2 horses. Might take us 5 now. It's small, isolated. Good place to disappear for a while until we figure out our next step." Our next step. The words gave Abby a warm feeling. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Abby's clothes had dried overnight, though they were stiff with river minerals. She dressed quickly while Ethan prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and biscuits. "Your horse will have to carry both of us plus supplies," she observed as they packed up camp. "Will he be able to manage?" "Copper's sturdy," Ethan said, patting the gelding's neck. "But we'll need to go easy on him, take frequent breaks. And we'll have to be choosier about our route, stick to easier terrain when possible." Traveling doubled up on a single horse created a new intimacy between them. Abby sat in front of Ethan in the saddle, his arms around her waist as he held the reins. She was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his breath occasionally stirring her hair. They made slower progress than before, as Ethan had predicted. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they navigated deeper into the mountains. They followed game trails where possible, avoiding the steepest slopes and most difficult passages. By the third day after the river incident, Abby was growing concerned. Their supplies were dwindling faster than anticipated due to their slower pace. How much farther to Pine Valley? She asked as they stopped to rest Copper by a small stream. Ethan squinted at the sun, calculating. 2 days, maybe 3 at this pace. We're getting low on food. I could try fishing again, Abby suggested. She had been practicing the skill Ethan had taught her with increasing success. He smiled, a genuine expression that warmed his features. You're becoming quite the outdoorswoman. I had a good teacher. His smile faded, replaced by a more serious look. Abby, there's something we need to discuss, about Pine Valley and what happens when we get there. She tensed, suddenly afraid he was going to suggest they part ways. What about it? The people there will have questions. About who we are, where we came from. It might be safer if we... He hesitated. If we let them believe we're married. Of all the things Abby had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. Married, she repeated. It would explain why we're traveling together, why we're looking to settle in a new place. A young married couple starting fresh, it's a common enough story out here. He watched her reaction carefully. It would just be for appearance's sake, of course. Of course, Abby echoed, trying to sort through her feelings. The idea of pretending to be Ethan's wife both thrilled and unsettled her. What would we tell them? About our past, I mean. Keep it simple, close to the truth where possible. We met in Wyoming. Decided to seek opportunity in Idaho. No need to mention Holloway or your father. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Abby had come to recognize as a sign of uncertainty. If you're uncomfortable with the idea. No, she said quickly. It makes sense. It's safer. She managed a smile. I suppose I should start practicing calling you husband. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes at her words, but he merely nodded. And I'll call you wife. The word hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither was ready to fully acknowledge. They continued their journey, the shared secret of their planned deception creating a new layer of complexity in their relationship. Abby found herself studying Ethan more closely, imagining what it might be like to truly be his wife. She noticed the small kindnesses he showed her, always ensuring she ate first, finding the most comfortable spot for her to rest, teaching her skills she would need in this new frontier life. On the afternoon of the 4th day after the river crossing, they crested a ridge and saw below them a valley nestled between towering mountains. A small collection of buildings was visible near a winding river, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding landscape. Pine Valley, Ethan announced, a note of relief in his voice. We made it. Abby took in the scene, her heart pounding with both excitement and apprehension. This remote settlement would be her home, at least for a while, and from this day forward to everyone they met she would be Mrs. Rutherford. It's beautiful, she said softly. And it was the valley floor was lush with spring growth, the surrounding peaks still capped with snow, the river a silver ribbon connecting it all. Ready? Ethan asked, his arms tightening slightly around her waist. Abby took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. They descended into Pine Valley as the afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light. Copper, sensing the end of their long journey, moved with renewed energy despite his burden. As they approached the cluster of buildings that constituted the town center, curious faces turned to observe the newcomers. Pine Valley was smaller than Cheyenne, but surprisingly well established. A general store, a smithy, a small church, and what appeared to be a combination saloon and hotel formed the heart of the settlement. Homes of varying sizes and states of repair spread outward along the valley floor. Ethan guided Copper to the hitching post outside the general store. "Let's see about supplies first, then find a place to stay," he suggested, helping Abby dismount. The interior of the store was dim after the bright sunlight outside. An older man with a full beard looked up from where he was arranging merchandise on a shelf. "Afternoon," he greeted, his gaze curious but not unfriendly. "Don't believe I've seen you folks before." "Just arrived," Ethan replied, removing his hat. "Name's Ethan Rutherford. This is my wife, Abigail." The word sent an unexpected thrill through Abby, even knowing it was pretense. She managed a smile and a polite nod. "Ben Maxwell," the storekeeper introduced himself. "Own this place with my son. You folks just passing through or looking to stay a spell?" "Hoping to stay," Ethan said. "Looking for work and eventually a place of our own. Any suggestions where we might start?" Maxwell stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Might be. Loggers Camp up north is always hiring. Several ranches in the area too if you're handy with cattle. As for a place to stay tonight, Clara's boarding house is your best bet. Clean rooms, fair prices." "Much obliged," Ethan said. "We could also use some supplies. Lost some of our provisions crossing a river a few days back." While Ethan discussed their needs with Maxwell, Abby explored the store. It was well stocked for such a remote location, testament to the growing population of the territory. She found herself lingering over small luxuries she had taken for granted back in Cheyenne. Scented soap, writing paper, ribbons. "Go ahead and pick out what you need," Ethan said, appearing at her side. "We've got enough money left." Abby selected a few practical items: a comb, soap, a sewing kit, and one small indulgence. A book of poetry she found tucked among more practical volumes on farming and animal husbandry. Maxwell's eyes twinkled as he wrapped her purchases. "Don't get many folks in here interested in poetry." "You a teacher, Mrs. Rutherford?" The name startled her again. "No, though I've always loved reading. My mother taught me to appreciate literature." "We could use a teacher here in Pine Valley," Maxwell commented. "Got plenty of young'uns growing up wild as weeds. Current school marms looking to retire end of summer." Abby's interest was piqued. She had never considered teaching as a profession, but she was well educated by frontier standards. "Something to think about," she said. With directions to Clara's boarding house and their new supplies, they left the store. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in dramatic purples and reds. Clara's establishment proved to be a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch and window boxes filled with early summer flowers. The woman herself was a robust, no-nonsense widow in her 50s who eyed them critically before declaring she had one room available. "One," Ethan repeated, caught off guard. "For you and your wife," Clara said, eyebrows raising. "Unless you're not." "Yes, we are," Abby interjected quickly. "We're grateful for the room," Clara nodded approvingly. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late or you'll go hungry till breakfast." She handed them a key attached to a wooden fob. "Second floor, end of the hall. Washrooms shared down the hall to the left." Their room was small but clean, furnished with a double bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a chest of drawers. A braided rug covered most of the plank floor, and crisp curtains framed the single window that overlooked the main street. Ethan set their bags down awkwardly. "I can sleep on the floor," he offered. Abby felt a blush rising to her cheeks. Of course, they would have to share a room to maintain their charade, but the reality of it, the intimate proximity it would entail, was suddenly overwhelming. "We'll figure it out," she said, turning away to hide her discomfort. "We should clean up before supper." The boarding house dining room was already half full when they came downstairs. Clara introduced them to the other guests, a young doctor newly arrived to set up practice, an elderly couple visiting their son's family, and a land surveyor working for the territorial government. Conversation flowed easily over the simple but hearty meal of beef stew, biscuits, and apple pie. Abby found herself genuinely enjoying the company and the sense of normalcy after days on the trail. The other guests were curious about the newcomers but not intrusive, accepting their vague explanation of seeking new opportunities in Idaho. Dr. Thomas, the young physician, proved particularly friendly. "Pine Valley's growing," he told them enthusiastically. "New families arriving every month. Good time to get established here." "What brought you here, Doc?" Ethan asked, helping himself to a second serving of stew. "Opportunity, same as you," Thomas replied. "Trained in Boston, but there are doctors on every corner back east. Out here I can build something, be of real use." He glanced at Abby. "Mrs. Maxwell mentioned you might have an interest in teaching." News traveled fast in small communities, Abby reflected. "It's a possibility. I'd need to learn more about what's involved." "I could introduce you to Mrs. Perkins, our current teacher," Thomas offered. "She'd be glad to discuss it with you, I'm sure." By the time they retired to their room, Abby felt cautiously optimistic about their prospects in Pine Valley. The community seemed welcoming, with opportunities for both of them to find their place. The awkwardness returned, however, when they closed the door behind them. The bed seemed to dominate the small room, impossible to ignore. "I meant what I said," Ethan began, retrieving an extra blanket from the chest. "I'll take the floor." Abby watched him spreading the blanket on the wooden planks. "You'll be uncomfortable. I've slept on worse." He sat on the edge of the bed to remove his boots. "It's silly," Abby said suddenly. "The bed's big enough for both of us. We can be adults about this." Ethan looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Are you sure?" "I trust you," she said simply. "And after sleeping on the ground for days, neither of us should have to sleep on a hard floor when there's a perfectly good bed available." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. "If you're certain." They prepared for bed with careful politeness, taking turns using the washroom down the hall. Abby changed into her newly purchased nightgown behind a makeshift screen created with a blanket, while Ethan waited in the hallway. When they finally lay side by side in the darkness, a careful space maintained between them, Abby found herself more awake than ever. She was acutely aware of Ethan's presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of soap, and something uniquely him. "Ethan," she whispered. "Yes." His voice was equally soft in the darkness. "Thank you for everything, for helping me escape, for bringing me here, for—" She struggled to find the right words, "for giving me a chance at a real life." She felt him turn toward her, though she couldn't see his expression in the darkness. "You don't have to thank me, Abby. He paused. "I'm glad I found you, or that you found me, I suppose." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Abby." Sleep came eventually, and when Abby woke the next morning, she found herself curled against Ethan's side, his arm around her shoulders. For a moment, she remained still, savoring the comfort of his warmth, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. Then, slowly, she extricated herself, careful not to wake him. The days that followed established a routine as they settled into life in Pine Valley. Ethan found work at a nearby ranch, his experience with cattle making him a valuable addition to the crew. Abby, after meeting with the aging schoolteacher Mrs. Perkins, agreed to begin training as her replacement. They continued their pretense as husband and wife, gradually growing more comfortable with the roles. Abby found herself enjoying the way Ethan would take her hand as they walked through town, the casual affection he showed her in public, a hand at the small of her back, a quick kiss on her cheek before departing for work. It was pretense, she reminded herself, but it felt increasingly natural. Their nights in the boarding house room remained chaste but progressively less awkward. Often, they would talk into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Abby learned of Ethan's childhood in Texas, of his dreams of someday owning his own ranch. He listened to her reminisce about her mother, her love of books, her secret desire to see the ocean someday. As weeks passed, Abby began to feel truly at home in Pine Valley. She enjoyed working with Mrs. Perkins and the children, who ranged in age from 5 to 15. Teaching came naturally to her, and she found satisfaction in watching young minds grasp new concepts. The community accepted them readily. They were invited to Sunday dinners, barn raisings, and social gatherings. Abby made friends among the women, particularly Clara, whose gruff exterior hid a kind heart, and Emma Wilson, the young wife of the blacksmith. Only in private moments did Abby worry about their deception. How long could they maintain the charade? What would happen if the truth about their flight from Wyoming came to light? And most troubling of all, what of the growing feelings she harbored for Ethan, feelings that had nothing to do with pretense? Summer progressed, the valley lush with growth, the days long and warm. Ethan proved his worth at the ranch, earning the respect of the owner and his fellow cowhands. He began to speak of saving for a place of their own, a small homestead perhaps, where they could build a future. "There's good land available up the valley," he told Abby one evening as they walked along the river after supper. "The territorial government's offering parcels to settlers willing to develop them. With what I've saved and what we could borrow, we might manage it by fall." Abby's heart skipped at the seriousness in his voice. "Our own place," she echoed. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun gilded his features, highlighting the lines that hard work and weather had etched around his eyes. "I know this all started as a necessary deception, Abby. But these past weeks—" He took her hands in his. "I've come to care for you deeply." Abby felt her breath catch. "Ethan, let me finish," he said gently. "I don't expect you to feel the same way. You've been through so much, had your choices taken from you. The last thing I want is for you to feel obligated or trapped again." "Is that what you think?" Abby asked, squeezing his hands. "That I'd feel trapped with you? I think you deserve a real choice. And if that choice isn't me, if you want to build a different life here, I'll understand. The teaching position is yours come fall. You could support yourself, make your own way." The generosity of his offer to release her from their pretense, to give her true freedom, moved Abby deeply. But it also clarified what she had been feeling for weeks now. "What if my choice is you?" she asked softly. "Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because in all my life I've never met anyone who makes me feel the way you do." Hope kindled in Ethan's eyes. "And how do I make you feel? Safe, respected, seen?" Abby stepped closer to him. "When I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Ethan's hands released hers to cup her face gently. "I've been wanting to kiss you for weeks now," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I didn't want to presume." "I think," Abby said, her heart pounding, "that a husband is allowed to kiss his wife." His lips met hers then, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. The kiss was everything Abby had imagined and more tender yet passionate, a promise and a fulfillment all at once. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Abby. I think I have since that first morning when you stood outside the livery with such determination in your eyes." "I love you too," she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. "So much that it scares me sometimes." "We don't have to rush anything," Ethan assured her. "We can take our time, do this right." Abby laughed softly. Ethan, we're already married, at least as far as everyone in Pine Valley is concerned. He grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. True enough, but I'd like to make it official, properly, when you're ready. I'm ready now, Abby said, surprising herself with her certainty. I don't want to pretend anymore. I want to be your wife in truth, not just in name. Ethan kissed her again, more deeply this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her close against him. Then we'll speak to the preacher tomorrow. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, the future spreading before them like the valley itself, full of possibility, of promise, of hope. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small white church that served Pine Valley. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the friends they had made during their time in the settlement. Abby wore a dress of pale blue calico that Emma Wilson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ethan, in his best shirt and a new vest, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that they had fled one wedding only to willingly enter into another. But the differences were profound. This union was born of love and mutual respect, a choice made freely by both. As they exchanged vows, Abby felt a sense of rightness, of completion. The journey that had begun in fear and uncertainty had led her here, to this moment. To this man who had risked everything to help a desperate woman he barely knew. The celebration afterward was joyous, a community coming together to welcome its newest official family. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Clara surprised everyone by revealing a softer side, presenting the couple with a handmade quilt for their new home. "Always knew you two were meant for each other," she said gruffly. "Even if you did try to fool an old woman about already being married." Abby gasped, but Clara merely winked. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. Whatever brought you two together, I'm glad it did." Later that night, in the privacy of their boarding house room transformed now into a bridal chamber by Clara's thoughtful touches, Abby and Ethan came together as husband and wife in truth. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the deep bond that had formed between them during their weeks of shared danger and growing trust. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Abby traced the line of Ethan's jaw with her fingertips. "You ever think about them?" she asked quietly. "My father, Holloway," Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes I wonder if they're still looking for us." "I used to be so afraid," Abby admitted, "but now, it seems like another lifetime, another person who was afraid." "You never have to be afraid again," Ethan promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Not while I'm with you." Autumn came to Pine Valley in a blaze of color, the aspens turning gold against the evergreen backdrop of the mountains. By then, Ethan and Abby had moved into their own place, a small but sturdy cabin on 20 acres of land up the valley. It needed work, but it was theirs, purchased with Ethan's savings and a loan from the Territorial Bank. Abby had taken over as the schoolteacher, finding fulfillment in the work and in the respect it earned her in the community. Ethan continued at the ranch, but spent his free time improving their property, mending fences, adding a proper stove to the cabin, planning for crops they would plant come spring. Their happiness seemed complete, unmarred by the shadows of the past. Until one crisp October day when a stranger rode into Pine Valley. Abby was dismissing her students for the day when Emma Wilson came hurrying to the schoolhouse, her face pale with worry. "Abby," she said breathlessly, "there's a man in town asking questions about you and Ethan. Says he's from Wyoming." Abby's heart stuttered in her chest. "What sort of man?" "Well-dressed, older, has the look of money about him. He's over at Maxwell's store now. It could be Holloway himself, Abby thought with rising panic, or someone he'd sent. After all these months, had their past finally caught up with them? "Thank you, Emma," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "Would you mind walking the younger children home today? I need to find Ethan." Emma agreed, concern evident in her expression. Abby left quickly, her mind racing. Ethan would be at the ranch, too far to reach quickly. She would have to face this threat alone, at least initially. Making a sudden decision, she turned toward the general store rather than away from it. Better to know what they were facing than to flee blindly. The store was quiet when she entered. Just Ben Maxwell and a single customer, a gray-haired man in an expensive coat who was examining a display of tobacco. He looked up as the bell above the door announced her arrival, and Abby felt a jolt of recognition. Not Holloway, but someone almost as unwelcome. Judge Carlton from Cheyenne, her father's friend and Holloway's most loyal supporter on the town council. "Abigail Zimmer," he said, a thin smile stretching his lips. "Or I suppose it's Rutherford now, according to the local gossip." Maxwell looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "You two know each other?" "Oh, yes," Carlton replied smoothly. "Miss Zimmer and I are old acquaintances from Wyoming. Her father will be relieved to know she's safe." "What are you doing here, Judge Carlton?" Abby asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Looking for you, my dear. Your disappearance caused quite a stir in Cheyenne. Your father has been beside himself with worry." The lies came easily to him, Abby noted. Her father would have been more concerned with the embarrassment her flight had caused than with her safety. "I'm sure Victor Holloway has been equally concerned," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Carlton's smile tightened. "Mr. Holloway was disappointed by the turn of events, but that's all water under the bridge now. I've come to bring you home, Abigail. This is my home," she stated firmly. "I'm married now with a life here. Yes, to the cowboy who abducted you. Quite a romantic tale, I'm sure." Carlton's tone made it clear he found it anything but. "Unfortunately, your marriage may not be as binding as you believe." "What are you talking about?" Abby demanded, fear coiling in her stomach. "Your father never rescinded his permission for you to marry Victor Holloway. In the eyes of territorial law, that agreement may take precedence over your hasty arrangement here." Carlton smiled again, the expression not reaching his eyes. "I've brought the necessary papers to annul this unfortunate mistake." Abby felt the blood drain from her face. Could it be true? Could her father's agreement with Holloway invalidate her marriage to Ethan? "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," Maxwell interjected, surprising both of them. "The girl's a grown woman, free to marry who she pleases. No agreement between her father and another man changes that." Carlton turned a cold gaze on the storekeeper. "This is a legal matter, sir, not subject to your opinion." "Maybe not," came a new voice from the doorway, "but it is subject to mine." Abby turned to see Dr. Thomas standing there, his usually friendly face set in hard lines. "As the justice of the peace who performed the Rutherfords' wedding, I take exception to your claims, Judge." Relief flooded through Abby at the sight of an ally. Thomas stepped fully into the store, moving to stand beside her. "Wyoming territorial law may differ from Idaho's," Thomas continued, "but I can assure you that here, a woman of legal age needs no father's permission to marry. The Rutherfords' union is entirely legitimate and binding." Carlton's confidence wavered visibly. "I have papers. Your Wyoming papers hold no authority here," Thomas cut him off. "And I suggest you consider carefully before making further assertions. Attempting to coerce a married woman to leave her husband could be construed as criminal intent." The doctor's calm assertion of legal facts seemed to deflate Carlton's bluster. He glanced between Thomas and Abby, reassessing his position. "Victor Holloway is not a man who accepts defeat easily," he said finally, his voice lowered. "He sent me ahead to assess the situation, but he will come himself if necessary." A chill ran through Abby at the implied threat. "Tell him not to bother," she said. "Tell him I'm happy here, married to a good man. Tell him to forget about me and move on with his life." Carlton studied her for a moment, perhaps seeing for the first time the change in her, no longer the intimidated young woman she had been in Cheyenne, but someone who had found her strength and her voice. "I will convey your sentiments," he said stiffly, "but I make no promises as to how they will be received." He nodded curtly to Maxwell. "I believe our business is concluded." After he left, Abby sagged against the counter, her legs suddenly weak with relief and lingering fear. "Thank you," she said to Thomas. "I don't know if what you said about the law is true, but oh, it's true enough," Thomas assured her with a smile. "I made sure to study up on marriage laws before I started performing ceremonies, but even if it weren't," he shrugged, "this community takes care of its own, Abby. You and Ethan belong here now. We wouldn't let some outsider force you back to a situation you fled." Maxwell nodded in agreement. "Doc's right. That man shows his face here again, he'll find a reception committee waiting." Their support touched Abby deeply, but it didn't entirely ease her concern. "I need to warn Ethan, if Holloway himself comes." "I'll send my boy to the ranch," Maxwell offered. "He can ride fast. Get word to Ethan before you could get there yourself." By the time Ethan arrived back at their cabin, riding hard with fear evident in every line of his body, Abby had worked herself into a state of anxiety. She ran to meet him as he dismounted, nearly knocking him over with the force of her embrace. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his hands moving over her as if checking for injuries. "Maxwell's boy said there was trouble. Someone from Wyoming. I'm fine," she assured him quickly. "It was Judge Carlton from Cheyenne. He came looking for me, said my father sent him. And Holloway." Ethan's expression darkened. "What did he want?" Inside the cabin, Abby related the encounter in detail, Carlton's claims about the validity of their marriage, his implied threats, Thomas's intervention. "He's gone now," she finished, "but he made it clear that Holloway might come himself if I refused to return." Ethan paced the small confines of their home, tension evident in every movement. "I should have expected this," he said grimly. "A man like Holloway doesn't just give up when he's denied something he wants." "What do we do?" Abby asked, hating the tremor that had returned to her voice. She had thought herself beyond this fear, had believed their new life was secure. Ethan stopped pacing to kneel before her where she sat at their table. He took her hands in his blue eyes steady on hers. "What do you want to do, Abby? We could leave, start over somewhere else. California maybe, or up to Canada. Somewhere even Holloway's reach can't follow." The offer was tempered with regret. He knew what it would cost them to abandon the life they were building in Pine Valley, their home, their friends, the respect they had earned in the community. Abby thought of her students, of the cabin they had worked so hard to make comfortable, of the plans they had for the future. "No," she said firmly. "I'm tired of running. This is our home now. I won't let him take it from us." Pride shone in Ethan's eyes. "Then we stand our ground. But we'll be prepared, just in case." In the days that followed, they maintained their normal routines, Abby teaching, Ethan working at the ranch but with a new vigilance. Ethan began carrying his revolver everywhere, something he hadn't done since their arrival in Pine Valley. Abby kept Sarah's knife close at hand. Word spread quickly through the small community about the stranger who had come asking questions. Rather than generating suspicion about the Rutherfords, it rallied the settlers around them. Men took turns riding patrol on the roads leading into the valley. Women ensured Abby was never alone in town or on her way to and from the schoolhouse. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Holloway or further emissaries from Wyoming. Abby began to hope that Carlton's report of her firm refusal and the community's support had discouraged the cattle baron from pursuing her further. Then, one evening as she was preparing supper in their cabin, waiting for Ethan to return from the ranch, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Thinking it was her husband, she moved to the window, a welcome smile already forming on her lips. The smile froze as she recognized the rider, not Ethan but Victor Holloway himself, older and more intimidating than she remembered, sitting tall in an expensive saddle atop a black stallion. Fear clutched at her throat, but she refused to give in to it. Moving swiftly, she retrieved Sarah's knife from the drawer where she kept it, tucking it into the pocket of her apron. Then she stepped onto the small porch of their cabin to face the man she had fled across half a continent to escape. "Mr. Holloway," she greeted coldly as he dismounted, "you're a long way from Cheyenne." His smile was, as she remembered it, predatory, calculating, without warmth. "Abigail, you're looking well. Marriage seems to agree with you." "It does," she affirmed, staying on the porch, maintaining the higher ground. "Though I'm curious what brings you all this way when Judge Carlton must have told you I have no intention of returning to Wyoming." Holloway tied his horse to the hitching post Ethan had installed near their well. "Carlton said you seemed settled. I wanted to see for myself." His gaze swept over the modest cabin and surrounding property. "This is what you chose over the life I offered you. A dirt farmer's hovel." "I chose freedom," Abby replied evenly. "And love, something you wouldn't understand." Anger flashed in Holloway's eyes at her defiance. "You were promised to me, by your father, by law, by custom, that Cowboy stole what was rightfully mine." "I was never yours," Abby said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "I am not property to be traded or stolen. I made my choice, the only choice that was ever truly mine to make." Holloway advanced toward the porch, his movements deliberate, threatening. "You're coming back with me, Abigail. Your father needs you. He's not well." The mention of her father gave her pause. Despite everything, she couldn't help but worry. "What's wrong with him?" "His heart is weak. The doctor says the strain of your disappearance has taken a toll." Holloway's tone was carefully modulated to convey concern, but Abby detected the manipulation beneath. "If my father is truly ill, I'm sorry for it," she said, "but I won't return to Cheyenne. Not with you, not ever." Holloway's facade of civility slipped. "You don't have a choice. I've spent too much time and money tracking you down to leave empty-handed." He reached the bottom of the porch steps. "Make this easy on yourself, Abigail. Pack a bag. Say goodbye to your cowboy when he returns. Tell him it was a pleasant diversion, but you've decided to honor your original commitment. And if I refuse—" Abby's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the handle of Sarah's knife. Holloway's smile returned, colder than before. "Then perhaps he won't return at all. Accidents happen on ranches. A spooked horse, a charging bull. Who's to say what might befall a careless cowhand?" The threat against Ethan ignited something fierce and protective in Abby. "You won't touch him," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "If you try, I swear you'll what?" Holloway mocked, taking the first step onto the porch. "You're just a woman, Abigail. You have no power here." "She's not just any woman," came Ethan's voice from behind Holloway. "She's my wife, and you're trespassing on our property." Holloway turned slowly to find Ethan standing at the edge of the clearing, rifle raised and aimed. He had approached silently on foot, leaving his horse out of sight. "Rutherford," Holloway acknowledged, his tone conversational despite the weapon trained on him. "I was just explaining to Abigail that her place is in Cheyenne, with her father, and eventually with me. Her place is where she chooses it to be, Ethan replied, moving closer, the rifle steady in his hands. And she's chosen to be here with me. A touching sentiment. Holloway's hand drifted toward his coat, where Abby suspected he carried a concealed weapon, but ultimately irrelevant. The agreement between Harold Zimmer and myself predates whatever arrangement you've made with his daughter. The only arrangement that matters is the vow I made before God and this community to love and protect my wife, Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Holloway's face. A vow I intend to keep. Holloway's hand disappeared inside his coat. Noble words from a horse thief and kidnapper. Several things happened at once then. Holloway drew a small pistol from inside his coat. Ethan fired, the shot going deliberately wide, splintering the porch railing near Holloway's shoulder. And Abby, seeing the cattle baron's intent, lunged forward with Sarah's knife in hand. The blade caught Holloway's arm as he raised the pistol, opening a long gash from wrist to elbow. He howled in pain and surprise, the weapon falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Ethan was on him in an instant, kicking the pistol away and pressing the rifle barrel against Holloway's chest. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now," he growled. Blood soaking his expensive coat sleeve, Holloway glared up at them both. "You wouldn't dare." The law out here tends to side with homesteaders defending their property against intruders," came yet another voice. Dr. Thomas stepped into the clearing, pistol drawn. Behind him were Ben Maxwell, the blacksmith Wilson, and 3 other men from town, all armed. "We heard a shot," Thomas explained to Ethan and Abby. "Thought you might need some help." Holloway looked from face to face, seeing no sympathy in any of them. His confidence visibly crumbled. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," Thomas contradicted him. "Mr. Holloway, you're currently trespassing on private property, armed, having made threats against the property owners. In Idaho territory, that's grounds for arrest at minimum." "You have no authority as justice of the peace." "I have every authority," Thomas cut him off. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. You will leave Pine Valley immediately. You will never return. You will make no further attempts to contact or coerce Mrs. Rutherford. In exchange, we won't press charges for today's incident." Holloway's face contorted with rage and humiliation. "You can't dictate terms to me. Do you know who I am?" "A man bleeding on someone else's porch," Maxwell observed dryly, "and not looking too impressive at the moment." The blunt assessment seemed to penetrate Holloway's anger. He looked down at his injured arm, then at the circle of determined faces surrounding him. For perhaps the first time in his life, Victor Holloway recognized defeat. "Fine," he spat. "Keep her. She's brought me nothing but trouble anyway." He turned his venomous gaze on Abby. "Your father will be disappointed." "My father sold me to clear his debts," Abby replied steadily. "His disappointment is a price I'm willing to pay for my freedom." Under the watchful eyes of Ethan and the townsmen, Holloway mounted his horse. "Idaho's a backwater," he said with a final attempt at dignity. "You'll regret choosing it over the life I offered you." "I haven't regretted it for a single moment," Abby told him truthfully. They watched him ride away, not lowering their guard until he was out of sight. Only then did Abby's composure crack. She began to tremble, the knife slipping from her fingers to clatter on the porch. Ethan was at her side instantly, arms encircling her. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "He's gone, for good this time." The men from town approached the porch, concern evident in their expressions. "You two all right?" Maxwell asked. Abby nodded, drawing strength from Ethan's embrace. "Yes, thanks to all of you." "That's what neighbors do," Wilson said simply. "Look out for each other." Thomas examined the blood on the porch where Holloway had stood. That was a clean cut, he observed with professional interest. Right along the radial artery. Another inch deeper and he'd have been in serious trouble. I wasn't trying to kill him, Abby said, surprised by her own calm in recalling the moment. Just stop him from shooting Ethan. The doctor smiled. Well, you certainly succeeded. I doubt he'll have full use of that arm for weeks. He looked at the knife, still lying where Abby had dropped it. Where did you learn to handle a blade like that? I didn't, Abby admitted. I just reacted. Ethan's arms tightened around her. She's full of surprises, my wife. The pride in his voice warmed Abby through and through. She had stood her ground. She had defended her home and the man she loved. The frightened young woman who had fled Cheyenne before dawn all those months ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to fight for what mattered. After the men from town had left, promising to keep watch on the roads out of the valley to ensure Holloway truly departed, Ethan and Abby stood together on their porch in the gathering twilight. You think he'll come back? She asked, leaning against Ethan's solid presence. He considered the question seriously. No, men like Holloway care about their pride, their image, being run out of town by a woman with a knife and a bunch of settlers. He shook his head. His pride won't let him risk that humiliation again. What about my father? Do you think he's really ill? I don't know, Ethan admitted. It could have been just another manipulation, or there might be some truth to it. He turned her gently to face him. If you want to find out, to maybe write to him. Abby thought about it, about the father she had known before grief and drink had changed him, about the man who had been willing to sell her to clear his debts. Maybe someday, she said finally, but not yet. Right now, I just want to focus on our life here, our future. Ethan smiled, the expression lightening his features in a way that still made her heart skip. Our future, he repeated. I like the sound of that. They went inside their small cabin, closing the door on the outside world. The supper Abby had been preparing was cold, but neither of them cared. They had faced their past and defeated it. The future, their future, together stretched before them, full of promise. Winter came to Pine Valley with a vengeance, blanketing the mountains in snow and ice. The community drew together during the long, cold months, sharing resources, stories, and companionship to keep the isolation at bay. Ethan and Abby's cabin became a gathering place on Sunday afternoons, their door always open to friends and neighbors. Abby continued teaching, though attendance was sporadic during the worst of the weather. Ethan worked on improving their home, adding shelves for Abby's growing collection of books, crafting a rocking chair that sat by the fire, planning for the barn they would build come spring. Their love deepened through the winter, growing from the initial rush of passion into something more enduring, a partnership of equals, a sharing of dreams and burdens, a quiet certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. Spring arrived with a rush of melting snow and new growth, and with it came news that traveled through the small community like wildfire. Abby was expecting their first child. A baby, Ethan marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach as they lay in bed one night. Our baby. Abby covered his hand with her own. Are you happy? Happier than I ever thought possible, he admitted, voice rough with emotion. When I think about how close we came to never meeting, never having this. Don't, Abby said softly. We found each other, that's all that matters. As her pregnancy progressed, Abby continued teaching, determined to fulfill her commitment to the school year. The children were excited about their teacher's impending motherhood, full of questions and suggestions for names. Summer brought the construction of their barn, with neighbors coming from around the valley to help raise the frame in a single, labor-intensive day that ended with food, music, and celebration. It's hard to believe it's been a year, Abby remarked to Ethan as they watched their friends dancing in the yard beside their new barn. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, where their child grew stronger each day. "A year since what?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Since we arrived in Pine Valley, since we started our life together." She looked up at him, love evident in her eyes. "The best year of my life." Ethan's kiss was gentle, reverent. "The first of many," he promised. Their son, James Harold Rutherford, was born on a clear autumn day, with Clara serving as midwife and Dr. Thomas standing by. He had Ethan's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair, and his lusty cries announced his arrival to the world with unmistakable vigor. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, holding his son for the first time, awe and terror mingling in his expression. "He is," Abby agreed, exhausted but radiant, "and he's ours, our family." Family, the word held new meaning now. Not the broken remnants of what she had left behind in Cheyenne, but something new and whole that she and Ethan had created together. As James grew from infant to toddler, their homestead flourished as well. Ethan added more land to their original parcel, planted crops, raised cattle. Abby continued teaching part-time, bringing James with her to school until he was old enough to stay with Clara or Emma during her teaching hours. Letters occasionally arrived from Cheyenne, not from her father, who had indeed been ill but had recovered, nor from Holloway, who had eventually married a banker's daughter from Denver. Instead, they came from unexpected sources. The wife of the new minister who had taken over her father's store after his retirement, a former schoolmate who had read of Abby's scandalous flight in the local newspaper and secretly cheered her courage. These connections to her past no longer brought fear or regret, just a gentle recognition of how far she had come from the young woman who had stood at her bedroom mirror, contemplating a future not of her choosing. When James was 3, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Sarah Clara Rutherford, named for the two women who had helped make their life possible. Sarah, whose knife had saved them in their moment of greatest danger, and Clara, whose no-nonsense support had eased their integration into Pine Valley. Life was not always easy in the Idaho Territory. There were harsh winters, failed crops, illnesses that swept through the valley. But through it all, Ethan and Abby faced each challenge together, their love a constant in an uncertain world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Abby with a gift, the deed to a larger piece of land closer to town, with a proper house already built upon it. "The Johnsons are moving back east," he explained as Abby examined the deed with amazement. "They offered to sell to us first." "It's a good house, Abby. Room for the children to grow, closer to the school for you. We can keep our original homestead too, expand our operation." "It's wonderful," Abby agreed, overcome with gratitude for how far they had come. "But you know I would be happy anywhere as long as we're together." Ethan's smile was tender as he gathered her into his arms. "I know, but you deserve the best I can give you, Abby. You and the children." They moved into the new house before winter set in, the additional space a luxury after the cozy confines of their cabin. James and Sarah had their own rooms. There was a proper kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and best of all, a library for Abby's books, a growing collection supplemented by Ethan whenever he traveled to Boise or other larger settlements. Pine Valley itself was growing, attracting more families, developing the infrastructure of a proper town rather than just a remote settlement. Ethan served on the town council, his practical nature and fair-mindedness making him respected throughout the valley. Abby, now the head teacher at the expanded school, was equally esteemed for her dedication to education and community welfare. 10 years after their flight from Cheyenne, on a summer evening much like the one when they had first confessed their love by the river. Ethan and Abby sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with the newest addition to their family, a puppy James had rescued from a litter abandoned at the edge of town. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Running away that morning, choosing this life over the one you might have had?" Abby looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment." She reached for his hand, fingers intertwining with the familiarity of long practice. "Why would you ask that now, after all this time?" Ethan shrugged, a hint of the old insecurity briefly visible beneath his confident exterior. "I was thinking about how different your life might have been. As Holloway's wife, you would have had wealth, comfort, status." "And misery," Abby finished firmly. "What I have with you, what we've built together, is worth more than all the riches in Wyoming territory." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me the most precious gift possible, Ethan. You gave me a choice when everyone else was determined to deny me one." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And you chose me." "I choose you," Abby corrected, her voice soft but certain. "Every day, in every moment, just as you choose me." The conviction in her words seemed to settle something in Ethan. He drew her closer, his arm around her waist as they watched their children's play turn to a spirited game of tag across the wide yard. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber hues that never failed to take Abby's breath away. This place that had once been strange and unknown had become home in the deepest sense of the word. Here, she had found not just safety but purpose, not just escape but belonging. As twilight deepened into dusk, Ethan and Abby called the children in for supper. Together, the family that had begun with a desperate gamble before dawn all those years ago gathered around their table, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, Abby knew with absolute certainty that running away had been the bravest thing she'd ever done, and the best choice she had ever made. Not because it had led her away from danger, but because it had led her home to Ethan, to their children, to the life they had built together against all odds. A life of their own choosing, filled with love freely given and joyfully received. A true happy ending, not written by fate or dictated by others, but crafted by their own hands, their own hearts, their own unwavering belief in each other and the future they would continue to build day by day, choice by choice, love by love.